In the beginning, there were no United States. There were only colonies, scattered along the eastern coast of a land far from the European kingdoms that laid claim to them. In the early 1600s, ships crossed the cold, endless Atlantic to land on the shores of a continent already inhabited. Native tribes lived across the land, each with their own customs, languages, and ways of life. But to the settlers arriving from England, this was a place to start again, a place to survive, or perhaps to escape. Life in the early colonies was slow, often hard. People lived in wooden cabins, cooked over open fires, and relied on each other to endure long winters and failed harvests. They farmed tobacco in Virginia, cut timber in Massachusetts, and traded fur in the northern woods. There was no electricity. No newspapers, at first. No paved roads. Only dirt paths, candlelight, and the sound of wind through the trees. And yet, this was the beginning of something. A collection of communities, held together by survival, faith, and the strange pull of freedom. The British Crown oversaw the colonies from across the ocean. The king sent governors to enforce laws and collect taxes, but often the colonists were left to govern themselves. Small assemblies were formed. Local rules were made. It was not independence, but it was not total control either. Over time, the colonists began to think of themselves as something separate, not entirely British. Not entirely new, but something in between. Decades passed. The colonies grew. By the mid-1700s, 13 British colonies lined the coast, from Georgia in the south to Massachusetts in the north. There were cities now, small but growing, like Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston. People owned land, raised families, and attended church on Sundays. But beneath the calm, something stirred. Tensions with Britain began to rise. The British government, deeply in debt from wars in Europe, began to impose more taxes on the colonies. The Sugar Act. The Stamp Act. The Townshend Acts. These were not just financial burdens, they were reminders that the colonies were still subjects, not citizens. Many colonists argued they should not be taxed without having a voice in Parliament. The phrase "no taxation without representation" began to echo through town halls and printed pamphlets. Protests followed. Boycotts of British goods. Petitions. Angry letters. In Boston, a group of colonists dressed as Native Americans boarded a British ship and dumped crates of tea into the harbor. The water turned brown that night. The British responded harshly, closing the port and sending more troops to enforce order. The colonies, once loosely connected, began to feel a shared struggle. In 1774, delegates from the colonies gathered in Philadelphia to discuss their grievances. They called themselves the First Continental Congress. It was the first time so many different regions had come together for a common purpose. They debated, wrote letters, and hoped for peace, but prepared for war. In April of 1775, the war began. British troops marched toward the town of Concord to seize weapons. Colonists met them at Lexington. No one knows who fired the first shot, but once it rang out, the American Revolution had begun. Battles followed. In Bunker Hill. In Quebec. In the Carolinas. Farmers became soldiers. Merchants became generals. The colonies were at war with the greatest empire in the world. George Washington, a tall Virginian with military experience, was chosen to lead the Continental Army. He had no formal training, no navy, and few supplies. But he had patience, discipline, and a deep belief in the cause. His army was cold, poorly fed, and often unpaid. But they fought, retreating when they had to, striking when they could. Washington's leadership became a quiet symbol of endurance. Back in Philadelphia, in the summer of 1776, the Second Continental Congress met again. This time, they prepared to take a bold step. A committee was formed to draft a document. Thomas Jefferson, only 33, was chosen to write most of it. He stayed up late into the night, by candlelight, shaping words that would echo for centuries. On July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. It stated that all men are created equal, that they have rights which no king can take away, and that the colonies were now free and independent states. It was a bold statement, and a dangerous one. Signing that document was an act of treason against the British Crown. The war did not end with the declaration. It dragged on for years. Battles were won, then lost. Towns were burned. Men froze to death at Valley Forge. The French joined the American cause, sending ships and soldiers that helped tip the balance. In 1781, British General Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. The fighting mostly stopped. But it wasn't until 1783, with the Treaty of Paris, that Britain formally recognized the independence of the United States, now free. The new country faced a different kind of challenge, governing itself. The Articles of Confederation were the first attempt at a national government. But they were weak. The states kept most of the power. There was no president, no national court system, and little ability to enforce laws. The government could ask for money, but not demand it. It could suggest cooperation, but not ensure it. And so, the years after the war were marked by uncertainty. Farms struggled. Debts piled up. Rebellions broke out, like Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts, where angry farmers marched on the state government. It became clear that the Articles were not enough. In 1787, another convention was called. Again in Philadelphia. This time, the goal was to fix the Articles. But what happened instead was the creation of an entirely new document, the United States Constitution. The delegates argued for months. Some wanted a strong national government. Others feared tyranny. They debated how many representatives each state should have. How to balance power. How to protect rights. In the end, they compromised. The Constitution created 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. It allowed for checks and balances, and gave power both to the states and the federal government. It was not perfect. It did not end slavery. It did not give women the right to vote. But it was a framework that allowed the country to grow and improve. It was signed in September of 1787. The following year, it was ratified. In 1789, George Washington was elected the first President of the United States. He took office in New York City, which at the time served as the temporary capital. There were no political parties yet. Washington served not as a king, but as a steward, someone who guided without ruling. He set precedents, stepping down after 2 terms, forming a cabinet, giving an inaugural address. His quiet leadership shaped the young republic. As the 1790s unfolded, the country slowly expanded. New states joined the Union. Roads were built. Trade routes opened. Cities began to grow. But the work was just beginning. The wounds of war still lingered. The question of slavery remained unresolved. Native tribes continued to be pushed westward. And Americans, now citizens of a free country, had to learn how to live with freedom. There were no fireworks at the end. No sudden moment when everyone felt unified. Just slow, steady progress. The revolution did not end with a bang. It settled into a long, uncertain peace. A country born in conflict now had to survive in cooperation, and that is how America began. Not with perfection. Not with certainty. But with the willingness to try. To argue. To build something new. And to keep working on it, one generation at a time. Even now, the echoes of those early days remain. In the names of towns. In the words of laws. In the quiet knowledge that this country, like all others, began with people, not heroes or legends, but people, flawed, hopeful, and determined. Sleep well, and thank you for listening to the story of how the United States came to be.